The opinions expressed on Two-Way Traffic are those of Darren Coleman and are for general information purposes only. It does not constitute any legally binding engagement between the podcasters and anyone else. Always check with your advisors to obtain your own tax or investment advice. Welcome to Two-Way Traffic with Darren Coleman. In this series, Darren aims to guide you through the complexities, complications, implications, and most importantly, the advantages of having money and family on both sides of the border.
In this episode, Darren is joined by legendary financial commentator Lou Schizas, who says the state of capitalism in Canada today is capital flight, with so many people of wealth fleeing the country.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another edition of Two-Way Traffic, the podcast. And this is going to be a fun one for everybody. I am delighted to be joined by, I'm a big fan, have been for years, Lou Schizas. So many of you will know who I'm talking about. So Lou was the voice on ROB TV, which was the precursor to what we now call BNN, or the Bad News Network, or the Business News Network. And also for a long time, the business commentator on AM 640. And I spent a lot of time driving around in my car waiting for your segment of the business news, Lou. And your catchphrase was happy capitalism. And so I'm delighted to have you on the podcast today. Thank you.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Darren. It's a pleasure.
So I want to dive right in because we're both kind of head-on kind of guys. So happy capitalism, that's what you're known for. That's how many people remember you. What's the state of capitalism today? Is it happy? What do you see in Canada? And then we'll talk about what we see in the States, because you and I are both in Oakville, Ontario. So what does it look like from a Canadian's perspective? How's capitalism doing?
I think it's been enfeebled. A lot of enterprises have been legislated out of business. You see Canadians of means with wealth leaving the country, and you see foreign investment depleted. A capitalist in other parts of the world saying, oh, no, not there. There's better places to put our dough. So I see it as enfeebled, and it's sad, but it's the reality that I'm dealing with.
Well, okay, let me challenge that. We just had an election, right? Canadians had a choice of, do we want to change teams or do we want to keep the same team and maybe a different captain? And we went into this whole, we've got a challenging environment with Mr. Trump wanting to change all the trade deals. And it was such an important period of time. We decided to suspend Parliament because why would we have that getting in the way? And we've got a new sheriff in town, and he's, well credentialed and looks pretty good on the surface in terms of, I don't mean his hair, I mean like the skill set, because we finally decided competency matters, apparently. And we've got the whole elbows up thing. So are we going into this wonderful era for Canada where we're going to renegotiate everything on our terms and, onshore manufacturing? And if we all buy French's ketchup instead of Heinz, it'll be better. Isn't that where we're headed? Isn't that good for us?
Well, I'll ask you one question, Darren. Have you ever won an argument with your biggest client?
They win all the arguments, of course.
Yeah. And so is it the U.S. our biggest client?
It is.
Are we going to win an argument with them?
No.
So,
we shouldn't go into it as an argument, should we?
No. There's a lot of ways to make things happen. And in my perspective, when you look at the leaky sieve that is the Canadian border, I think there was an argument to be made. You got to tighten that up. Absolutely. And as far as drug transportation across our border, you get stats that say, only 1% of the drugs getting into the U.S. comes from Canada. Let's remember, that's what got caught.
Yes.
Yeah. What about the stats?
Well, apparently we're not. Well, the thing is, we're not even checking the containers for stolen cars, let alone little pills. We're losing Toyotas and Range Rovers like crazy. Somehow we forgot to check for those.
Right. So as I look at it, there was a legitimate case to be made that your biggest client wanted changes. And that would have been somewhat easier to negotiate if you didn't decide that you're going to stake your claim to fighting your biggest client. And I can tell you from my experience, and I don't know about yours or your listeners, go ahead, take it on, see where it gets you. And I don't think it gets you anywhere good.
Well, it was interesting for those of us that are watching this, that the first thing that Canada decided to do was, not go to Mr. Trump, but hey, let's go and talk to Europe and see if we can kind of make our future with them, our old masters, right? And see if we can so we do that, we come home, no deal. And then Mr. Trump goes to Scotland and gets a deal. So now we don't have a deal with the US and we don't have a deal with the EU. We're kind of being left a little bit out in the cold. Is that a reasonable interpretation?
Well, if anybody thinks that going and hat in hand to Europe looking for a deal is going to work, I think that's, I could tell you another fairy tale and tuck you in. I think that if you looked over the trade numbers over the last number of decades, doing business with Europe was not a big factor, right?
No, I think it's less than 10% of our real trade, right?
Yeah.
And it makes sense because there's this thing in between. It's called an ocean.
Yeah, not that you can't overcome that, but you can.
It's just
you got to have a pipeline that runs, from the energy resources in Western Canada to the East Coast. Well, nobody wants to do that, or there's blockades along the way, and increasing the flow to Asia, isn't that good. I mean, when you look at the trade numbers, energy is still the number one component. Right. It's followed by auto and auto parts, but I think that's a slim hand to be holding at this point. If you look at the history of Australia, they got out of the car business in 2018, and they're kind of a similar economy to ours.
Very true.
Small population, huge land mass, and they looked at the manufacturing plants in their country and said, you know what, we're subsidizing the living hell out of this to no real benefit. And they decided that they would use that capital to try and fund something else. And when I look at the auto deals that are made, it's predominantly predicated on the auto manufacturers holding our government's feet to the fire, in order to maintain the jobs that are there. They're not increasing employment. So,
well, and I think the question then for taxpayers is how much do we want to be funding somebody's occupation?
Well, I think that if it's in the right areas, you might have justification. But when you look at the employment base in automotive, it's been going downhill for decades. And, I'm talking about simple assembly. I'm not talking about, making all the parts and everything.
Or even all the engineering behind it.
Yeah. Yeah. So, when I take a look at it, I say, it's a lame horse to be backing in a race. I just don't think so. Eventually, in our lifetimes, I think you'll see those plants shut down and the operations move to the south.
Right. And it's interesting how, Trump is signing deals. There was just one announced yesterday with Apple that all the new iPhones and things around the world will be made with glass made out from Kentucky. So it's interesting how they're able to begin re-onshoring a lot of the manufacturing. But that's not really a game Canada's ever played. We just don't have the manufacturing infrastructure to be able to do that in any reasonable time frame. And clearly no one's out making deals to get these things done anyway.
Yeah, when you talk about glass, right, I don't think we're a world leader in that area. Corning obviously, really responded when Apple came to them and said, we need a glass that we can put into these mobile phones that we're making that is touch sensitive and resilient to dropping and so on. And, they're Corning anyway is looking for alternative uses for the Gorilla Glass, as it's called. And there's some manufacturers now that want to sandwich Gorilla Glass between other glass to make a more resilient gateway into your home. If you look at your average home, and you got some severe weather coming your way, you're going to want that Gorilla Glass in your front window.
Will it work for home invaders? Because I would argue that in Ontario and certain places that you would be more concerned about the baseball bat than the wind.
Yeah, well, they've tested it and they've shot 2x4s into these planes of glass with no destruction of the glass. It's very resilient.
That's interesting. Well, I know there's people that will buy film to do it, but this just goes back to this idea about engineering and productivity. And the hot top of the value chain is all the intellectual capital to create it, but being able to actually go all the way down to manufacturing it and have that vertical integration.
You got to attract capital.
Being able to do all of it.
Yeah,
exactly.
And when you look at things like the Canada Pension Plan, for example, a social capital pool, where are they investing? mostly offshore, right? Not
Yeah.
mostly, but
Yeah.
a good substantial leverage amount of their capital is being deployed outside the country.
So we clearly got some problems, and we're not maybe minding our own house very well. Let's look across the border for you and I, and look at how President Trump is doing. He's making deal after deal after deal. Is he making mistakes in your view, or is he kind of beginning to put the architecture or the platform in place for a bit of a renaissance to the American dream and the American exceptionalism?
Well,
What do you see what he's creating?
let's keep in mind that this experiment it only started in January.
Right.
We're really early into this. And,
True.
you're asking me, is he making mistakes? I think if you're not making mistakes, you're not doing enough.
That's fair.
Right.
Every business has to do that, right? That's true.
And so, when I look at what he's doing, I don't agree with everything. That would be impossible. But, the other day, he signed an executive order to get people that are living on the streets off the streets. And the operative word that I focused on was rehabilitation. So you have people living on the street. They're, addicted to drugs, alcohol. They have mental illness. I think that if you're going to take them off the street and say you can't live there, you got to start trying to rehabilitate them, right? So I see that as part of meeting the objective of his administration, was to get things right. And I don't live in a city where there is a large homeless encampment in Oakville, right? Or as I like to call it, Pleasantville. We don't have that. In Toronto,
there's a
they
joke
do.
there that Oakville's homeless encampment is Milton, but that's a bad joke for where the Oakville people are the rich ones, or Mississauga, I guess. All those houses in the field. But you're right. But it hasn't happened in your neighborhood, so it's not a day-to-day occurrence for you to have to see that. But increasingly, in many cities and towns across the country, that is becoming a reality for the citizens. Like, what happened to my park?
Yeah.
How were there all these tents here? And that's a development only in the last decade have we really begun to see that.
Yeah, and I think it's tolerated, and then you encourage more of it.
Yeah.
Now, do you have to have resources dedicated to helping solve that problem? Yeah, you do.
Right.
But I've seen the budgets for solving the homeless problem accomplish nothing. There was many articles written about the billions of dollars spent in California to address the homeless crisis with no result.
It's worse than it's ever been.
Yeah. So I say, it's very important. Results matter. And if you're not getting results, I don't know why you still, have your hands on the levers of the apparatus. You got to have results.
Well, it's an interesting idea, right? Because business people will try things. If it doesn't work, they're willing to say, let's try a different way. But I don't know if we see the same thing in government, where you create an infrastructure and you empower people and you create this bureaucracy and it doesn't want to change gears. And in the homeless area and in the issue around addiction, I'd say from what I can see as an observer, I'm not a specialist, but what I can see what many Canadian places have been trying to do is harm reduction. So I've actually seen in Vancouver and in Toronto, these vending machines that vend out hardcore drugs.
Yeah, I haven't seen
being,
those.
it's unbelievable. So I guess the idea is you may as well just get it there because it's a safer supply. And it's like, well, wait a minute. Is that the right plan, or should we be focusing on, as you say, rehabilitation? So I think from what I can see as an observer is Trump is at least saying, and I think other people now saying, we tried one path for a while. We aren't getting the results we want. Are we going to be brave enough to try a different path?
Yeah.
And of course, the people committed to the original one are going to fight that.
So when I look at what he's doing, I've seen attempts to change what's not working. And some people are criticizing it. And I'm saying it's early in the game. Give it time. Right now, people are being ballyhooed into panic on a number of different fronts about, the crisis and so on. Things are changing and we can't adapt fast enough. But, it's easy to say that when you're covered by, union protection and everything else, right? So I think that you got to give it time. And it's the same thing with Carney. You might be critical of what he's doing, but he's only been in the chair for a short period of time. Not that I'm happy with the results, but let's see what happens when Parliament comes back.
Yeah, which would be nice,
Yeah.
because I think Parliament has sat for what, 4 days or something like that
Yeah,
in all of
ridiculous,
2025.
right?
Like, really?
And no
And I
budget.
like, as a taxpayer, I'm like, could you please go to work for 20 minutes?
Yeah.
Like, really?
Yeah, and no budget.
I'd like to see.
Show me some numbers.
Yeah, actually, it was funny. I had a bet with Kim Moody with the fall economic statement. We had a chat, and he says, "Well, what do you think? The number is going to come in?" And I said, "Oh, Kim, it's going to be over $60 billion."
Yeah.
And he's like, "There's no way it's going to be that high." And of course, it was.
Yeah.
So we talked a couple of days after that, and he goes, "I had no idea." And I said, "I'm just disappointed I didn't go into a wager with you on that. I could have won money on that." So, and now, and you probably heard this, the rumors are that whenever we do get, whether it's an economic update, a statement, or hopefully a full budget, the number could be 90 billion plus.
Yeah,
as a deficit.
I've heard that number as well. And like I said,
and we both know that the real number will be more than that, right? This is like Scotty telling you when the engine's going to be ready. He's going to lie to you.
Right. So I think that we need to give it time, but I think the time is short. Right. And
that's a very good point.
Living in this schism that is Canada, with the dominant electoral landscape east of Manitoba, I think they'll put up with everything. Whereas in the West, they have a lot of things to not be happy with.
So I'm glad you got to that, because I was going to get to that in our conversation. Do you see, again, as an astute observer for many, many years and Canadian politics and business are obviously intertwined, back in the 90s, the issue was Quebec separatism and Quebec nationalism, but we're now seeing a rise of like Alberta nationalism. Is the next wave of, trouble, as it were, in Canada about our identity going to be the West saying, we want to split? If you won't do a deal with Trump, then we'll do a deal with Trump, as an example.
Well, I think
that's the next stress point, right?
Yeah, and I think it's justified when you see, federal legislation that is essentially outlawing the energy sector, mandating them out of business, frightening people about this, that, and the other thing. I say, you know what? I think that what you really need to recognize is that if you don't have energy, you can't do any work, right? Now, you might say there's different forms of energy. There's atomic energy, there's wind energy, there's solar energy, but I'm not seeing it deployed in enough volume to substitute for how we use energy today and for the foreseeable future.
Well, it's interesting. A few years ago, Germany came calling and said, "Hey, we'd like to get your liquid natural gas and apparently there was no business case to do that. And then they just made that deal with Trump. So I guess there is a business case.
Yeah,
for
and
that.
remember that was brought out by the puppet that was Justin Trudeau, when he said there's no business case for it. The guy's a moron. Right. You have to.
Yeah,
you have
it clearly was.
And he got elected 3 times. And then his economic advisor got elected the 4th time. So I think that we're kind of handcuffed to a part of the country that, likes rent-seeking types of activities. I don't know if you've been following the EV battery manufacturing debacle.
We have, and we've got some clients that have been involved in some of those things. So we've been the recipients of, or clients have, of some of those things. But I think that's the amount of money that we've committed as a country to the battery plants and the development of that technology. It's quite a bet, isn't it? And how's it going?
It's $58 billion. And nobody has articulated to me any sales figures. How about some orders? Do you have orders from these plants?
Yeah.
Do you have somebody stepping up and saying, here's a 10-year contract? No.
Right.
I haven't heard of it. I did hear today that they're ballyhooing employment starting in the plant that they're building. I think it's in Windsor for Volkswagen. But, how many jobs are Canadian jobs? I was reading that some of these are being brought in, expertise being brought in from other jurisdictions. So...
Well, I think Canada's proven to be very good at importing foreign workers.
Yeah.
I think that's something we've shown a very high level of skill at bringing talent in. Whether it's, an engineer or someone to take your Tim Hortons order, we've been able to bring in, the world's best and brightest across those different employment categories. And tough luck if you're a Canadian high school student, you want to get a job, there's no room for you. I say that as a parent of those kids. Yeah, they haven't been able to find maybe the opportunities that were there when I was a kid, because there's a bunch of foreign students that are now in those jobs.
Well, I mean, it
For better or
depends on,
worse.
what your kids want to do and how they want to do it and what they did to prepare themselves to get there. Um, I think that if they're
Well, that's not like working at Wendy's was going to be a career option, but if you're 16 and you want your first job, that was kind of traditionally where many young people went to go, and those are full. Those jobs don't exist for that group of people because there's no subsidy attached to employing the kid from Oakville necessarily.
Well, my daughter, as an example, couldn't fit the schedule for a fast food joint into her schedule, so she created
Okay.
her own employment. So she
Perfect.
took musical education to grade 8.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
she put out shingles, saying, I'm offering piano lessons for the little kids, right? She wasn't
Perfect.
offering herself up as someone that could build your kid up to be a concert pianist, but just the rudiments. She had a full calendar, and they all came to
Perfect.
my house so I could supervise who's coming in, who's
Yeah.
going out. And
Yeah.
that got her going, in terms of from age 15 to 18, that filled her coffers with cash.
Well, it's not a surprise to me that someone growing up in your house had a bit of an entrepreneurial flair.
Well,
That doesn't really surprise me.
well, no, but I mean, it's a matter of how you discuss it, right? Like when she
Yeah.
started taking piano lessons, I used to tell her, so, when you get to be in high school and whatever, you could be teaching piano if you go through this process and play the piano. And, I mean, you're taking instruction from somebody at a level where they're probably not happy. So if you went and got a master's degree in musicology, and you're teaching
Yeah.
my kid how to do Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star,
You might be
it
disappointed.
might be below where you thought your career was going to go. For her, she never had intentions of making it a career, right? So she also had a pricing strategy. So the market for an hour of musical education in the model was $60. She undercut that market. So she was offering the same thing for $30 an hour. That stimulated
And
them
she
in.
filled her calendar up.
And she
filled
was
her
more than
calendar up,
happy with that. And she did fill the calendar till she was, finished with that and moving on.
Okay. So actually, now I want to bridge off of this idea of taking something as it is and trying to see it a different way. And I want to tap into how many years were you in the business news commentary business? Like how many decades were you professionally in the news business?
Well, it started in Alberta. I had a radio show on AM 1060, CKMX.
Okay.
And it was called The Money Manager. So every Saturday, I got an hour to invite guests from the Calgary business community, Oil Patch. And I also had a modular design to the show. So I had,
How do you mean?
so I had regular features in the show.
Okay.
And one was the business editor of the Calgary Sun, Jeffrey Scotton. So he would come on for like a 10-minute segment and, give me his views on stuff. Great guy, lifelong friend since then. And then other modules that fit in, and then guest segments and what have you. So that, because in commercial radio, you got to make time for the commercials.
Yes.
Right. So you can't go too long. You can't go too short. You got to have it all fit in. And I also featured segments with business associates, right? So that they had a place and a platform using radio at the time. So from there, I went to report on business television as a startup and did that for 8 years. And then I concurrently, I was doing business commentary on AM 640 on their morning show. So I did that for 18 years.
Okay. So clearly a veteran of the news business. So one of the things I was curious about, given that experience and that perspective, what should investors take away to kind of manage their own engagement with the news, right? Because a lot of the news isn't just information. There's, especially today, there's quite often a spin around it, right? Like they talk about like plane crashes, not plane landings, like sensation, like it's about headlines and eyeball clicks and everything else. So I don't think there's really an argument that some of the news is maybe designed or presented in a way to get you to have an experience or a reaction. So are there little tips or tricks that you can provide to the average guy in the street like me, maybe not average, but that how do you be on guard for, or how do you be an intelligent consumer of news and news media? Are there things that you've learned to say, look, that's actually askew, maybe don't look at it that way, or this is another place to get sources? Like, what advice do you get to people to help navigate this onslaught of information we get that may or may not be as accurate as it used to be?
So I would recommend you put Joe the pro between you and that flow of information. So if you're not working with an advisor, right, you probably have a neglected plan, as opposed to having somebody that,
I've never heard it called that before. Okay.
Because like 90% of people pay no attention to their money.
Right.
There's
right. They'll spend more time planning a holiday.
That's right. And then there's a smaller percentage that pays some attention. They might read the weekend newspaper, if that's still being done, and look at the business section. And then there's a small segment like myself that spend more time reading through as much as I can and recognizing what the problem is, right? Yeah. The skew this way, the skew that way. So, for example, this morning, when I'm reading the story about all the jobs being created in the battery plant in Windsor, and, I think it was, what's his name, Vic Fideli, the minister of this, that, or the other thing.
With the yellow tie?
He's out there in front of the story, and
he's quite happy about that.
Quite happy until, you got to ask other questions, and I don't think those questions are being asked. How many orders do you have for the output of this plant? Without asking the question, what happened to the plant in Quebec being operated by Northvolt, I think it was? The Swedish company.
It's gone. Yeah.
Yeah, bankrupt.
That didn't work out very well.
Well, I don't know whose money was in it. I hope it wasn't mine through the social capital pools.
100% it was yours and mine through something.
Yeah. So, I think that unless you got a facility that you're building, aren't you going out and filling the order book on the day that the thing is operational?
Well, these are due diligence questions, right?
Yeah.
That financial professionals are trained to do. Like on our team, I have Christian on our team, and he's a CFA and a CPA, a master's of accountancy. That's all he does. And he's got the personality of a high-end laptop. He is just unbelievably analytical. So we employ those resources on behalf of the client. So I think that's great advice about having an intermediary to help make sure you're getting the right information and filtered in the right way, and someone as a bit of a watchdog or guard dog for your interests. But what are some of the other things that we can do? Should we just rely on maybe one or two sources, or how do we kind of begin arming ourselves just to deal with the world?
Well, I think you need to find legitimate sources that you trust. Like I still read the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times business section, the New York Post for the hanky-panky spanky file.
The fun stuff, yeah.
The stuff that's gossip ready. Trudeau and what's her name, the singer. That
Katy
kind
Perry. Well, it's funny because some of that stuff, you're right, some of that stuff actually winds up being ahead of the curve, right?
Oh, yeah. Where there's smoke, there's fire, right? So, but I only do that for entertainment purposes. They don't have much of a business section in the Post.
Right.
But you have to have a variety of sources, and you need to go beyond the newsstand, if you will. Right. Like there's a lot of financial experts that run websites, that run podcasts, that, really bring a different view. So I would suggest going through some of those and finding some that you might like.
No, I think that's good advice, because I think all of us have seen recently, some would call it the mainstream news, being a little challenged on, how did they actually present that information? The biggest example I can think of at the moment is how well did CNN, for example, during Trump's first term, present the whole Russiagate thing? Was that as accurate as it could have been? I would suggest maybe not. They could have done perhaps a better job, as it turns out.
Well, no, they definitely dropped the ball. And now you're seeing paybacks coming down the pipe, right?
Yeah.
You're seeing lawsuits being filed and indictments and so on. A lot of people are going to get dragged through the same crap that Trump went through, and we'll see where the chips fall. But typically, as you know, there's no perp walk and there's no jail time. It's all a wash, and that you just have to accept that.
Yeah,
you may not like it, but you got to accept it.
But I think you're right. It's easier today to find alternative, if you will, avenues to get information, because you no longer, if you want to be able to present your research or your information, you no longer have to go get a contract to get a radio show to do it or a TV show. You can present on Substack. You can have a podcast.
That's right.
You can, the medium has become highly accessible to just about anybody. Just with your phone, you can go out and create an audience and begin to tell your truth, which I guess also makes it harder because there's just so many more voices out there. So I think you have to be really, really critical as a listener and as a consumer to really try to figure out how you're going to put them all together.
Well, I think as well, if you accept the hypothesis, how about a ratings agency that looks at all of the stuff that's out there and gives you, a B, C, D, E rating on what you're hearing in terms of accuracy, in terms of foresight, those kinds of things. But there isn't.
Actually, it's interesting. There is one I have to figure. I'm having the seniors moment. I don't remember what it was, but there is actually a website that will take the news content and it will tell you which way it swings on the political spectrum. Like, was that more of a right-wing position? Was that more in the middle? Was it more left? So at least I think they're trying to put some barometer of what's the temperature, if you will, of that news item. Yeah. So when you're at least reading it, you got a bit of an arbiter of like, this is the spin on that pitch.
Yeah, I think in the world of financial information, really the bottom line is, did you make money or not? So when you're...
It's often that simple, isn't it?
Well, I mean, I remember years ago, my partner and I were talking about Amazon, and he said to me, because I didn't buy the story, and he said, okay, hey, Lou, what don't you get? It's trading over $200 a share. It's going up. Right?
Just follow the momentum.
Well, I said, okay, you're making a point. It seemed expensive at the time, not so much anymore. Right. So
no, and actually Amazon's an interesting example because I was in Nesbitt Burns back when, that stock started to go. And at the time we saw it, or everybody saw it, as an online bookseller.
Yeah.
And I remember reading an analyst report that said, look, to justify the price of the stock, this is how ridiculous it is. If you look at the average margin that they make on selling a book, well, to justify that stock price and their earnings, they have to instantly sell every book sold in the United States. Well, that's not going to happen. And then it gets worse. Americans, as of tomorrow, have to start reading and buying 4 times as many books. Like, it's just, so he created this model that showed how wildly impossible their business was to try and support that stock price. But of course, the analysts and none of us saw Jeff Bezos's vision. So we didn't see it. We didn't understand, Amazon Web Services and the Prime delivery. We didn't see any of that. Jeff did.
No,
so we didn't get the vision.
Early,
so
we're,
that's my point.
Web Services has been the element that drove them to profitability. Everything before Web Services was break even at best. All those other activities.
Well, and you're right. We started buying Amazon when I had a client, this is over a decade ago, that was in the cloud computing business. Yeah. And I said, could you explain to me what this cloud thing is? And he began telling me about Amazon Web Services. And he said, look, every major company, including yours, will eventually use it or a version of it because there's no logic to you having your own IT.
Yeah.
All of it will be outsourced. And he gave me all the rationale. And I went and looked through some analyst reports and nobody was valuing AWS for anything. So you basically could buy Amazon and get that whole cloud computing division for free. It was unbelievable when you bought the stock. And that has been remarkable. So this is what I mean. Like, we can take the information you have at the time, but we can't see the future. And if you're not in that space, you don't know. So it's hard to value them.
So, when you look at somebody like Bezos, he obviously had the skill to keep the analysts on Wall Street and Bay Street in their chairs as he was borrowing like it was going out of style and building out this infrastructure and fulfillment centers and delivery and the whole thing. But that's not an easy job. Anybody that can go and pitch that kind of outcome, they have, they're the Svengali.
Yeah, they have superpowers. Well, and we see that, right? Like the guys that built FedEx did it, Apple Computer did it. I'd say Elon Musk is doing things like that. It's interesting as we talk about those visionaries. Do you see anybody in Canada with a vision like that? Do you see anything that's homegrown that gives a chance for a Canadian business to have some level of success like that? I mean, Shopify maybe, because they had a great announcement the other day. They're now more valuable in the banks, which is quite an achievement. Anything else? Anybody else blip in your radar?
I haven't been searching that file, so I can't really respond. I mean, the last one was at Research in Motion.
Right.
That was a long time ago.
That was a long time ago.
They got.
And I guess that's actually part of the problem is that unless you're digging, you wouldn't find it. There's nobody, I think, unfortunately, that comes to mind to the average person that says that's a bright, like that's a Svengali of whatever it is.
Well, there are people in certain niches that we don't get enough, that don't get enough attention. And then there's people in certain broader areas that get too much attention. You mentioned the banks, and gotta love the banks because they spit out dividends and, they grow their market and all that.
Well, it's the old Butch Cassidy Sundance Kid, right? The banks have all the money. That's why they robbed them.
Yeah. But the reality is they're swimming in a protected pond, right? Like if you look at their deployment of capital, it's mostly in residential mortgages. They're not rolling the dice with entrepreneurs that want to borrow money to start a business or what have you, right?
Yeah.
They're
unless you believe we're into a new real estate super cycle in Canada, that's a hell of a bet, right?
Well, I think that there is opportunity. I mean, look at all, they talk about this housing crisis. Is anybody doing anything to actually address it other than, making announcements, standing in front with a shovel? I'm not seeing it. I mean, it takes a lot to get the development industry moving forward. Usually low interest rates. Well, clearly they're not low enough yet. And then you need employment growth. Yes, we have a lot of people that want what's called affordable housing, which by my definition is housing that you want, that you can't pay for, but I can pay for it. I find that to be a myth. You cannot provide people with things they can't afford for themselves.
Well, I would, on that point for housing in particular, I think one of the interesting things, like when I bought my first house, back in the late 90s, early 2000s, the ratio of income, the average person's income to the price of a house was about 3-ish times. So whatever you made, you could buy a house for about 3 times your income. And there were plenty of options to do that. Today, no, especially in the Greater Toronto area, it's more like 9 times is what we're seeing. So for the average person, it's like, what happened? Because something broke in the machine that just saw the housing prices surge past what incomes were able to do.
Well, I think that if you look at the history of interest rates post 2008, right? I remember saying, many times we are seeing generational lows in borrowing costs.
Right.
And, you better strap it on now and be ready for the refinance 5 years down the road.
And we saw that, and those lows kept kind of repeating themselves, right?
And then once
they started that game,
right?
Yeah.
And then the SARS, the COVID thing threw a wrench into everybody's reality, right?
Right.
I mean, we went out and mandated that people, had to do all kinds of things to prevent the spread with no proof. We had to all take vaccines with no proof that it prevented the spread, and so on and so on and so on. It's just the nature of the beast.
It is the nature of the beast. So lots of stuff out there to talk about. Lou, I'm going to close us there. We had a little more than half an hour together. So that's what I asked you for in terms of time. You've been very generous. Lots of good stuff to talk about. And if you're amenable, I'd love to continue this conversation in another episode, but I won't hold you to it, but I'd love to have you back. I think there's even more
stuff. Let's see where the schedules meet.
Lovely. All right. So on behalf of the listeners, thank you, Lou. It's great to hear your voice again and get your perspective. I don't think we have enough capitalists, unfortunately. So getting somebody of a like mind to kind of go make one. I got 2 at home, my kids. So thank you.
All right. Happy capitalism, Darren.
I'm so glad you did that. Okay. Thank you, Lou. Thanks everyone for joining us. We'll talk again.
This has been Two-Way Traffic with Darren Coleman. Thanks for watching and listening. If you have any questions or comments or ideas for new episodes, send us an email at twowaypodcast@gmail.com. And you can find the Two-Way Traffic podcast on Facebook and Twitter. This series is a production of the Acme Podcasting Company.
On behalf of the Two-Way Traffic podcast and Portage Wealth of Raymond James, thank you for listening to this conversation. This podcast has been prepared by and expressed the opinions of Darren Coleman and his guests and are not necessarily the opinions of Raymond James Ltd. Statistics, data, and other information presented are from sources Raymond James believes to be reliable, but their accuracy cannot be guaranteed. This podcast is for information purposes only and is not construed as an offer or solicitation for the sale or purchase of securities. Investors considering any investment should consult with their investment advisor to ensure that it is suitable for the investor's circumstances and risk tolerance before making any investment decision. Past performance is no guarantee of future results. Information provided in this podcast is general in nature and should not be construed as providing legal, accounting, and/or tax advice. Should viewers have any specific questions or issues in these areas, please consult your legal, tax, and/or accounting advisor. Raymond James Ltd is a member of the Canadian Investor Protection Fund. Raymond James USA Ltd is a member of FINRA and SIPC. Raymond James Ltd and Raymond James USA Ltd financial advisors may only transact businesses in provinces and/or states where they're registered.